story of the unknown soldier is one of fairness and respect for those unidentifiable soldiers of the Great War. This is the story of the unknown soldier. The journey began when it was announced that the bodies of those that lost to the war would not be brought home in 1915 and would just be buried near the site of their death with those brave men that they fought alongside in the trenches. The families back in Britain were heartbroken that they would not be able to visit their lost soul's grave and say goodbye to their loved ones, which was the case until an idea was born in 1916.
Reverend David Railton was serving as an army chaplain on the Western Front in 1916 and saw a grave one day, marked by a rough cross which had a pencil inscription, "An unknown British soldier." And so, the idea of the unknown soldier was born. It wasn't until 1920 when the Reverend wrote to the Dean of Westminster proposing the idea of a single anonymous soldier be brought back from the Western Front and displayed in a tomb in Westminster Abbey, amongst the kings, for those unidentifiable soldiers of the Great War and the families who didn't get to grieve at the grave of their lost soldier. The idea was that this anonymous soldier would represent the many hundreds of thousands unidentified soldiers. The Dean and the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, strongly supported this idea, and the selection process was put into motion.
15th of October, 1920. My dear Dean, I am directed by the Prime Minister to inform you that the memorandum of the 15th of October suggesting that the remains of one of the unknown men who fell and were buried in France should be exhumed and buried in Westminster Abbey was considered this afternoon by the Cabinet and accepted in principle. The Prime Minister has already notified the King of this. The Cabinet decided to set up a Cabinet Committee to make recommendation in consultation with Sir Douglas Dawson and yourself and the government departments concerned as to the arrangements for giving effect to your proposal. Lord Curzon is the chairman of the committee and Colonel L.S. Stoddard of this office is the secretary. I have already directed Colonel Stoll, when he was with Lord Curzon, to get in touch with you on the subject. Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson was present at the Cabinet during this discussion and is fully aware of the Cabinet's decision. If there are any details affecting the military which ought to be taken in hand at once, possibly you would think it.
On September the 7th, 1920, 4 unknown bodies were secretly exhumed from 4 temporary battlefield cemeteries to make it almost impossible for the identity of the soldier to ever be discovered. These locations were Ypres, Arras, the Aisne, and the Somme. Those digging up the bodies were not given any indication of the reasons behind why they were digging up these bodies, as this operation needed to have the utmost secrecy to keep the identity of this unknown soldier unknown. These 4 bodies were taken by field ambulance to GHQ at St. Polternois, where they were draped with the Union flag. Brigadier General Wyatt and Colonel Gell were then summoned to select a single body at random. Once the soldier was selected, a single French honour guard was selected to stand with the body overnight. They were then fitted for a specially designed oak coffin. On top was placed a crusader's sword and shield, on which was inscribed, "A British warrior who fell in the Great War, 1914 to 1918, for king and country."
On November 9th, 1920, the unknown soldier was taken home by horse-drawn carriages through guards of honour and the sound of tolling bells and bugles. Taken to quayside, it was looked by Maréchal Foch and loaded upon HMS Verdun, bound for Dover, where it was covered in wreaths and surrounded by French honour guards.
On the morning of November 11th, he was taken to Westminster, covered in the Union flag on which was placed a steel helmet and sidearms on a Royal Horse Artillery drawn by 6 horses and led by a firing party and the regimental bands of the Brigade of Guard. The route followed was Hyde Park Corner, the Mall, and to Whitehall, where the symbolic empty tomb was unveiled by King George V. At the tomb, the carriage halted, and King George placed a wreath of roses and bay leaves upon the coffin.
After a 2-minute silence, the gun carriage continued to Westminster Abbey, followed by the King, the royal family, and ministers of state. Once the last hymn had concluded, the helmet and sidearm were removed and the coffin laid in the tomb, where the King scattered earth from a silver shell case containing soil from Ypres, Arras, Aisne, and the Somme. The service was the mourning of the nation. Beneath this stone rests the body of a British warrior, unknown by name or rank, brought from France to lie in the most illustrious of the land and buried here on Armistice Day, 11th of November 1920, in the presence of His Majesty King George V, his ministers of state, the chief of his force, and a vast concourse of the nation. Thus are commemorated the many multitudes who during the Great War of 1914 to 1918 gave the most that man can give, life itself, for God, for king and country, for loved ones, home and empire, for the sacred cause of justice and the freedom of the world. They buried him amongst the kings because he has done good towards God and towards his house.